Welcome again to this symposium on digital open science, and it's about solving the societal and sustainability challenges of the 21st century. My name is Charlotte Keerdik, and it is my great pleasure to be hosting and moderating tonight's symposium. We are about to get started. However, I would like to start with first a couple of household messages. First of all, we would like you to engage, just like the fashion of open science, with us online via Twitter. We encourage you to use the hashtag OpenScienceWorks. Secondly, we would like to ask you also to engage with us. I mean, this is not just a symposium where we have speakers, but we also have a wonderful audience, so we'll be really happy if you can engage with us and ask questions. Then there's a couple of things that are very contrary to being open and open science. The first thing is that if you feel the urge to go to the toilet, you're more than welcome to do so, but do close the door. You find the toilets over there. And secondly, also very important, you are allowed to use your phones, but please put it on silent mode. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's about it for the household messages for now. And now I'd like to announce the first speaker of tonight, who will do the official opening. And this is Mr. Urs Bucher, the Swiss ambassador to the European Union. The floor is yours.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor for me to open tonight's forum on open science policy. The big audience we have here tonight shows very clearly that obviously we have chosen the right topic. The expectation behind all this is clear. Open science should help to give an easy and rapid access to the results of scientific research, and this not only for researchers but also for the political decision makers and also for the practitioners, both in the public and in the private sector. Open science, in our views, is the most valuable contribution to the faster and better solution of common problems. On our side, Switzerland, we have clearly defined a very ambitious strategy at the beginning of this year. This strategy is implemented by our partner organizations here tonight, notably by the Swiss universities, by the State Secretariat for Science, and also by the Swiss National Science Foundation. Just to give you one example, it is our ambition that by 2024, all publicly funded scholarly publications should be made accessible via internet. It's still a long way to go there, but it shows you where we want to go. Because one thing is obvious, if public money is spent for scientific work, we would not like to have the result of these expenditures closed behind a paywall. And this is one of the reasons why we are working hard to have a true policy of open science. Given our very intense cooperation with the European Union in the field of science and research, we are, of course, very pleased that the European Union has taken a true leadership in promoting open science agendas. I would notably like to thank also the Estonian Presidency for the promotion of inter alia research and innovation policies. And I would, of course, also like to thank the Estonian Presidency for helping us to make tonight's event possible. Together, we would like to achieve a cultural shift toward open science, following, of course, the FAIR principles also in scientific communication. With today's event, we would like to further improve our common understanding of the topic and to foster cooperation to elaborate the appropriate instruments to make scientific results available for the sake of a better future for all of us. I wish you all, ladies and gentlemen, a most inspiring evening. Thank you very much for being with us tonight. Thank you very much for actively contributing to achieve a common goal. Thank you.
And indeed, I think it's very good to hear a better future. Who doesn't want a better future? Thank you for these kind opening words and really stressing the fact that it's very important that also countries like Switzerland support the open science agenda. Well, dear audience, we don't just have speakers, we also have a digital contribution. So we would like to show you a video developed by Frontiers in cooperation with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, so that we all have a very good idea of what open science is about. So if we can please show the video.
The human race, we're a wonderful species, but at the same time, we also don't have a great track record.
We built towns 100 years ago to provide the labour force for factories for the Industrial Revolution. Now we need to look at how we build towns so people live a healthy lifestyle.
The buildings in Europe, for example, consume about 40% of the energy. By improving the efficiency of these systems, we can cut down on the energy use.
There are conservative estimates that the population is going to grow to about 9 billion by 2050. So clearly we're going to have to try to produce more food on less land.
I think the thing that I'm most excited about are genome editing approaches. And it's simply a modification of the DNA of that plant that could be found in natural variants, and so there's no foreign DNA involved.
Virtual reality gives people first-hand direct experiences, so we're going to take them through to the future of how they might be in 10 years' time, and hope that this can lead not just to an abstract opinion that yes, I agree that sustainability is important, but actually lead to people wanting to take action.
The greenhouse gas emissions need to come down, there's no question about that. And it needs scientists to inform us about the ways in which that can be done through innovation, through new research. It needs governments to put in legislation, but critically it needs businesses.
I find very important that research and results from research that can be relevant for sustainability is accessible to businesses.
Open information, open protocols are all going to be key to getting science out to industries, out to governments, and out to people that might actually be able to translate it.
There's so many scientific solutions out there already today. All we really need to do is to make them freely and efficiently accessible, and this will allow us then to implement the type of radically new products that are profitable and as well move us towards a sustainable society.
So, you've just enjoyed a small video, and I think it's also clear to you, ladies and gentlemen, that open science can bring us so much to so many different sectors. But there's still a lot of work that remains to be done. And many actors have a role to play, and one of those actors is also the European Commission. So please give a warm applause to Kurt van den Bergen, Director for Policy Development and Coordination at DG RTD, the European Commission. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Charlotte, for this kind introduction. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's always great to see this beautiful example of Swiss hospitality and efficiency in Brussels. I'm really pleased to be here, and I'm really very happy to see the lively interest there is for science and sustainability and the relationship between the two. I think no one can ignore anymore that if there is one challenge we have, but also opportunity in the decades to come, it's sustainability. That is very clear in what we see happening with our planet. We know about the planetary boundaries, that some of which were already crossed. But it's not only true for the planet, it's also true for the sustainability of our societies, and in Europe I would say the sustainability of the European social model that we want to see continue in the future, because we deeply believe in this. And for all this to be sustainable, we actually need to deliver on the saying of Lampedusa, who said everything needs to change so that it can stay the same. But we need to do that without falling in the trap that Alphonse Karr put up for us. Alphonse Karr famously said in 1839, plus ça change, plus ça reste la même chose. So we're a little bit in the conundrum here. We need to change for things to remain the same, but without staying the same. That is the challenge we have ahead of us. Fortunately, we have, since 2015, the Sustainable Development Goals, to which all countries in the world have adhered and have assigned to. Sustainable Development Goals, which are now universally applicable. It is not only applicable to developing countries as the MDGs were. SDGs are now globally applicable to every single country in the world. It's a global contract for humanity for the decades to come, and we have a lot of work to do. And one way in which we can help deliver on these sustainability goals is through science, technology, and innovation. Actually, the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda has defined science, technology, and innovation as an integral means of implementation of the development agenda, on the same level as, for example, trade policy or development assistance. Science, technology, and innovation go to the core of what humanity needs to do together and each individually to help deliver on this global contract for sustainable development. What is often overlooked is that one of the 169 targets in the 2030 agenda is that every country in the world, without exception, should, by 2030, invest public funds in research to the order of 1% of GDP. That is actually also a European target. We have the 3% target, of which 2% should come from the private sector and 1% from the public sector. This is now a global agenda, and all the countries in the world have signed up to this. As you know, in Europe we have a tradition of promoting sustainability. This is actually in our treaty, in Article 3 of the European Treaty, that everything we do has to contribute to sustainable development. Horizon 2020, which is the currently running program, in which Switzerland is a very valued partner. 60% of the budget of Horizon 2020 has to contribute to sustainable development. And I'm happy to report that as of now, we can say we will probably overshoot that target of 60%. And as we're slowly looking at what the future could bring and the next framework program, it is very clear to us, if we're looking at being open to the world and addressing global challenges, that the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Agenda will have to be a common reference framework for tackling together these challenges through cooperation in science and technology and innovation. There are different ways in which we will be hopefully able to do this if we get sufficient resources. One is through the concept of missions, where we really want to target sustainable development goals, not individually, but with a good interlinkage between them, and set really ambitious targets for Europe, for science, technology, and innovation to deliver on them. But the other way in which we are already doing it, and will do even more, is through open science. What I would like to assert tonight is that sustainability and open science are a marriage in waiting. Sustainability and science already know each other since a long time. They are engaged since a long time. We now have to make sure they get married, that we can tie the knot. And the more science becomes open, the more fruitful and happy the marriage will be. Openness, which is a key principle for our European Commissioner and our science and innovation policy at the European level, is really about breaking down barriers and borders that exist of all kinds between disciplines, between sectors, between countries, not just in Europe, but across the world, between science and society. So that's what we're trying to strive for. And if you look at it, open science and sustainable development goals have quite a number of characteristics in common. They are very global in nature. Science is a global endeavor. Open science will make it even more global, just like the Sustainable Development Goals, which are a global contract. They are really both about collaboration. Collaboration goes to the heart of sustainability, but also open science. Actually, open science is the coming of the collaborative economy, the sharing economy to science and the scientific endeavor, made possible by this tremendous revolution in the digital world, which allows this kind of collaboration. And there, I should say that when we look at sustainable development goals and the roles of science and technology, what we see is that with the framework programs at European level, we have developed a unique model of cross-border, transdisciplinary collaboration with more than 40 countries that have now signed up to this common program. This is unique in the world. It does not exist anywhere else, certainly, and not at that scale and with that kind of ambition that we currently have. Another characteristic that SDGs and open science have in common is that of speed. If we want to deliver on sustainability promises, we have to act very quickly. There is no time to waste. And open science is about speeding up. It's about a faster and better circulation of data and knowledge. So I would like to say that the SDGs are providing a very good and welcome purpose for the endeavor of science, and even more if science becomes open, so that it becomes very much responsive and relevant to society and what society expects from science. Open science, we believe, will make science more impactful by being responsive to what science expects, without necessarily being pushed or imposed agendas on it by science. But it will also make science more credible, because it will give a lot more transparency in what is happening in the scientific world. We already see this in concrete examples. When we had the Ebola outbreak, we really mobilized all the scientific actors, including on the industry side, to help develop a vaccine. This has been happening in a record time, thanks to open science, because the data were shared. There was a sharing of all the data and the knowledge, which has helped us to deliver much quicker and better on a vaccine that was necessary when the Ebola crisis broke out. I myself have seen very good examples in other areas. I know there are people here from the earth sciences sector. With the Belmont Forum, which is a global forum of research funders in the area of global change, with NSF in the United States, Japan, Brazil, etc., we have set up a program called Transformations to Sustainability, where social scientists from the north and from the south, together with natural scientists, identify a sustainability problem, a local sustainability challenge, develop solutions together, and then put the solutions with all the data in a global knowledge trust, so that everyone can have access to solutions that were developed to local sustainability problem, and see if these solutions can be replicated elsewhere. This is the kind of open science, globally oriented, very much collaborative, excellent at the same time. That is the open science agenda that we want to promote and are promoting in the service of sustainability. Now, what I would like to add is that the EU really wants to take leadership in this regard, and I thank the ambassador for recognizing the leadership that Europe has taken in this. But why should that be the case? Why should Europe take leadership in this area? Well, it's very clear, as our President Jean-Claude Juncker also recently said in his State of the Union speech, Europe is getting smaller. Demographically, we are maybe 7% of world population. Economically, our share is still important, but is declining. We're now representing 15% of global GDP. But if you look at science, as the recent report of the Lamy Group also has said, in science, Europe is a powerhouse. We still represent about 1/3 of all scientific publications in the world. And that is the same for sustainability. I think it's fair to say that the SDGs and the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda would not have happened without Europe being there and taking the leadership in it. So for Europe to lead in open science for sustainability, that is really an occasion, an opportunity for Europe to help shape the global science system, so that our system is very much outward looking, and that we can work together with scientists across the world to help deliver on the SDGs. Open science is about sharing, it's about caring, but also it's daring, because we take the leadership. It's new, it's innovative. I will not list here all the initiatives and the actions we are taking in terms of open access to publications, which is now a default policy in all the funding we have. We have now made the open access to data a default policy as well in the framework program in Horizon 2020, with the necessary opt-outs when this is justified. We have this very ambitious and challenging, I can tell you, venture of creating a European open science cloud, where all the scientists, through one portal, can have access to data from all disciplines, very much promoting the transdisciplinary research agenda, which we believe is at the heart of scientific and innovation progress in the future. We're working on metrics, alternative metrics, so that we can evaluate the contribution of scientists differently and reward them also in another way. We're working on integrity, we're working on citizen science, very much looking, especially in the next program, at how we can have more co-design of research agendas with stakeholders, end users, citizens, but also co-create solutions through experimentation. And when you will see our work program for the last 3 years of Horizon 2020, adopted and presented on the 27th of October, you will see that open science is really very much at the heart of our policy and of our programs. And we do all this in a very European way. We don't do this top-down. We don't impose it. It would be great if we could come with a European directive that obliges everyone to go open science, but you know as well as I do that it doesn't work that way. We want to do this in a collaborative mode. We want to co-create this open science ecosystem with all the stakeholders, all of you who are here tonight. And I really would like to thank you for your interest and your support in this endeavor. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kurt, for your contribution. I think the European Commission has been very, very clear and is very ambitious as well. And it's actually funny you used a personal motto of mine, which is sharing is caring. And basically, open science is all about sharing is caring and daring as well. Perhaps one small question, if we may. Of course, it's too early to say anything right now about FP9, that's for sure. You just mentioned that over 60% of the budget is already made available for sustainability in Horizon 2020. What would be your personal expectation or vision of a percentage for FP9 when it comes to sustainability?
I don't have a briefing on that.
That's true.
I can also only give my personal opinion. I think everything we do in science and innovation at the European level should contribute to sustainability. but we don't want to do it in a very narrow way. It really has to be happening bottom up from the scientists and from the innovators. And I think if we find the right way in doing this, so that it is not imposed, but that it is a shared ambition, then I think the whole framework program could contribute to sustainability.
Very good, thank you so much for this contribution. So I think that statement was very clear, and now we'd like to also turn to a new contribution, and that will be of one of Europe's leading advocates of open science, and one of the hosts also of this symposium. It is my great pleasure to introduce to you Camilla Makram, and she's the CEO of Frontiers, so the floor is yours.
Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you, everybody, for being here and for this wonderful speech that we as well just heard from Director Vandenberger. So what I would like to talk to you about today is actually why it is so important to make our science open. And as we just heard from Director Vandenberger, there is a beautiful marriage happening right now between sustainability and open science. Humanity is facing some existential challenges. By 2030, so within the next 13 years or so, we want to address quite big challenges such as completely eradicating poverty, hunger, and we want to as well live wealthy and healthy lives, but all within the boundaries of a healthy planet. And this is really where the challenge lies. Because if the 8 billion people, everybody on this planet, is supposed to have equal opportunity to the same living standards, the same health as the currently 1.3 billion Europeans and North Americans, then we have to radically change our food supply systems and our energy systems. Because what's happening over the past 50 years is that we've been bringing our ecosystems to their limits. We're polluting our air. We're treating our oceans as garbage bins. We're destroying our forests so we can grow more food. And we've caused the 6th mass extinction, where species are basically dying away on a daily basis. And we're bringing our climate to a tipping point, probably, from where there might be just no return. So over the next 50 years, we have to completely change the way, move towards clean energy and towards sustainable food production if we want our children to stand a chance to enter a 22nd century. And the great news is that science has all of these solutions, and they're already here. If you look, for example, at clean energy, this is a development in solar that has started already 180 years ago. And over numerous innovation cycles, both in academia as well as in industry, solar and wind energy for the first time became cheaper just last year. And this is really the basis for mass adoption of these new clean energies. Let's look at food production. So we want to completely eradicate poverty. But as countries are moving out of poverty, they're as well consuming more and more meat. And this is a problem because already today, 30% of our greenhouse gases emissions stem from methane-emitting cows. But scientists, again, can help solve us this dilemma. Biochemists have found ways how to grow meat, for example, in bioreactors, or recreate it from vegetable ingredients. And this could be the new basis of how we can have mass meat consumption without harming our planet. And there is a lot of these solutions to a lot of our sustainable development challenges, because there's more and more scientists out there in the world creating all of these new solutions. Currently, there are 8 million researchers commanding over a worldwide R&D budget of about $2.3 trillion, and it's growing exponentially. We're producing exponential amounts, growing amounts of research data, which end up in research articles, which soon, within the next 3 years or so, will reach 3 million articles, research articles being published every year. And this is as well the basis for our economy. I love this slide because it actually shows that just in the 1960s, at the beginning of the 1960s, our worldwide GDP was not more than 1.3 trillion. Just in the last 60 years, it has grown to over 74, and that's all thanks to research, technology advancements, and innovations. Now, all of this is really great news. The solutions are out there. But there is as well an unknown problem here, and I call it the unknown problem because this actually seems to be going quite well. Research and innovation are leading to prosperity, to growth, so our governments and our companies are reinvesting into our research labs. But actually few people are aware that this system is severely bottlenecked by our current publishing system, the way how we are publishing science today. So let's see what the problems are. There are two main problems that I'm going to talk about. The first one is access. Of the over 2 million research articles that are currently published every single year, close to 90% are behind paywalls. They're just not accessible. 90% of today's published health papers are not accessible. 94% of all research that addresses sustainable development, energy, climate, and so forth are not accessible. They are behind paywalls. Now, how are we supposed to come up with these solutions on the timescale that is required by 2030 if we cannot even access our research efficiently? The irony is that not even the richest universities, not even the richest researchers in the world can afford to access this science. That's where the open access or open science revolution, if you want to say so, started. It wasn't in Africa. It was at Harvard. It was at Oxford, at Cambridge. And this is kind of absurd because we are paying for the research from our taxpayers' money, the same way how we're paying for our highways that we're using every day. Then imagine that a company would come along and set up a toll gate and charge so much money that only the richest cars can afford to pass through. We would go in the barricades, right? We would never allow this to happen on our streets. Yet this is exactly what we're allowing to happen on our daily basis to the most precious knowledge that we have, and that's our research. Now, the subscription system says, like what they are doing, what they're helping to do is to select the very best science, those Lamborghinis and the Ferraris to pass through the toll gates. But the problem is that many great research papers are actually stuck in the process. They're bounced around from one journal to another before they finally do get published in what we call rejection cycles. And this is not just happening to any type of paper, like some strange papers. It is happening to the best and the most disruptive research that we produce today. If you take this paper, for example, it was rejected once and took nearly a year to get published, after all the research was already done. And then this particular paper, the authors of this paper went on to win the Nobel Prize in physics just recently. The scale of this problem is massive. Again, of the over 2 million papers that are published a year, at least 1 million valid research articles are first bounced to another journal before they finally find their home and get published. If you estimate that one such bounce or rejection cycle takes at least 6 months, and this is a conservative estimate, then the total delay introduced by the current publishing system is at least 500,000 years to publish valid science every single year. Researchers waste 100 million hours in rewriting, re-editing, re-reviewing these articles for a different journal. And if you assume we as researchers, I'm a researcher, become a bit cheap, that 1 hour is worth $100, then the total cost to the system is $10 billion every year. The solution? It's open science. It's been around already for more than a decade, but it's now starting to take off. So the closed subscription system is, in this system, the universities are paying so that the researchers can read the articles to access them. In the new open science system, universities are as well paying, but this time for the service to get the articles processed, and then everybody can read them for free. And ironically, this is much, much cheaper or more cost-effective than the closed subscription system. So if adopted universally, universities could actually save $6 billion every year to do more research. The closed subscription system is hunting for those few impactful studies, whereas open science takes on the responsibility to publish everything that is valid as quickly as possible. And again, if adopted universally, we could completely eliminate those horrendous delays. So, if you adopt open science fully, we are actually facing a new type of challenge. How do you publish large amounts of articles at high quality, at the best possible scientific excellence? It's a different challenge, because in the subscription model, you're just taking a very few amount of articles and discarding with the rest, valid science. So here we are facing a quality at scale problem. But we're not the only industry to face that type of problem. Take air traffic control, right? We have increasing amounts of planes that need to be kept up in the air. You don't want any plane to fall out, right? So then how do you do that? How do you fly that many planes safely and keep them up in the air? Well, the first thing that you need to fly safely is the very best pilots. So at Frontiers, what we do, we recruit only the very best researchers to our editorial board. Currently, it's over 70,000 scientists from all the top universities in the world. NIH, Harvard, Stanford, Oxford, Cambridge, Max Planck, and so forth. And the role of these scientists is to quality control the articles, to peer review them. Their role is actually not to judge the impact of the studies, because for that we have actually pioneered technology that can measure the impact far more objectively and quantitatively, views, downloads, citations. And I'm going to show you some data afterwards of how nicely this actually works. And we also are completely transparent, so we show who the reviewers, who the editors are, and link them to online profile on our research network Loop, where you can see the full publication history of these people, where they're affiliated, who they're collaborating with, and so forth, eliminating completely conflicts of interest and introducing a type of transparency and a complete chain of accountability that has never been achieved before in publishing. Now, what else do you need to fly safely? You need standard operating procedures at each single stage of the flight, and you also want to have the best technology to enable your pilots. So it's for this reason that we've built this large open science platform, online platform, internet platform, where researchers can review articles efficiently, where editors are automatically alerted to tasks that require their attention, while in the background, thousands of workflows actually start guiding the articles through the pipeline. And that is basically how you do it. You take the very best researchers, and pair them with the very best technology, and that's a way of how to produce quality. And let's see whether this works. Let's look at some of the evidence. I'm going to show you that open science actually works extremely well. You'll probably be surprised to hear that today the world's most cited journals are open journals. If we, for example, look at the multidisciplinary journals as they're listed in the journal citation reports published by Thomson Reuters, you'll see that +1. This is an open access journal which was started about 10 years ago at the NIH. +1 receives more citations, or the articles in +1 receive more citations than 3 of the world's most prestigious science journals combined. And the same is as well the case for all the specialty journals. Here, Frontiers, for example, is publishing the world's most cited psychology journal, the most cited neuroscience journal, the most cited plant science journal. In every other category we're listed, we're amongst the top most cited journals. These are total citation rates, but if you prefer to look at average citation rates over a certain time window, that's the impact factor, then you'll as well find that Frontiers journals in over 20 categories were listed are amongst the rank amongst the highest percentiles on impact factor, meaning they are amongst the most impactful journals in the world. So open science works really well. Let's look at readership impact. And it's some of the data that you can visualize when you have these alternative metrics where you measure views and downloads. So Frontiers published over 70,000 articles to date, and they received 300 million views and downloads, as you can see, massively from all over the globe. A lot in Europe and in the US, but pretty much everywhere. And interestingly, some of the most views and downloads actually come from economic hubs, such as the Silicon Valley or Shenzhen in China. And here I'm zooming in just on a particular article on gene editing, which is a very hot area in genetics today. And you can see that, yes, this article is here downloaded in Stanford, but many more views come from startup areas in Palo Alto or even from Google. Okay? Because the reality is that today all companies, whether they're small or big like Google, depend on science and technology and innovation to survive and thrive. Today's economy, it's a knowledge economy. And in this context, having this rapid and efficient and open access to the latest research is what gives you the competitive economic advantage. So another great example to actually illustrate the economic impact of open science is the Human Genome Project. Here at first people tried to patent genes, lock them away in expensive databases, but then luckily for all of humanity it was actually decided, let's make this free and open. And the economic impact of this has been enormous. For every single dollar invested in the Human Genome Project, $145 were made in return. It basically triggered the entire biotech industry, today worth billions of dollars every single year. So it is for all of these reasons that we need open science now. I think, like the arguments are quite obvious. And it's great because everywhere in the world, people, funders, governments, universities are mandating open access to research articles and access to data. And Europe, very clearly, has a leading role in all of this. Just last year, Commissioner Möders mandated that all European-funded research articles must be free to access by 2020. And we see that leadership role as well, not just in the articles, but as well, as we just heard, in the open science cloud. So a concerted effort, this is really a leadership role that Europe is taking here, in linking now as well the articles to the data behind that. I'm convinced that this will be the new basis for a new type of economy in Europe, but worldwide as well. We see Europe's leadership role as well reflected in our own sample. So this is Frontiers data that I'm showing you. As I said, more than 70,000 articles published. And most of our articles actually come from Europe, so do most of our authors and most of our editors. So we see that open science has really been embraced very strongly by the European academic community. But we also see that European research has very high impact. So here we are plotting the average views and downloads for the top 10 producing countries. And what you can see that out of the top 10, 6 are European countries. The most viewed and downloaded research actually today in our sample comes from the UK. And you can again see that complete global impact of that European science. Every corner of the world is reading and downloading European research. But we see it as well in the citation rates. Here again, 6 out of 10 countries are European countries, now with the most cited articles actually coming out of the Netherlands, as you can see here. But that's not the end of it. The cherry on top of that is that EU-funded research. So in our sample, we have over 3,500 research articles that are funded directly by Horizon 2020 or FP7. And you can see that the EU-funded research is actually the most cited in this particular sample, even more than any other country. So Europe is actually doing quite a good job in selecting the best research or researchers to be funded as well. While all of this is great news, it's just a drop in the ocean. That is something that we should not forget. It's just the tip of the iceberg. 90% of our research still remains locked up, not widely accessible, and we will be hearing about these stories throughout this afternoon. So just imagine if we had full access to all of our research, how that would actually accelerate innovation, economic growth, and all of these solutions that we need for this beautiful marriage between open science and a sustainable future. And I think we owe it to our children. It's time to act now. The clock is ticking. We have climate change. We gotta unblock the science now, because science has all the solutions for clean energy, for sustainable cities, and for sustainable food production. And we can make more money in this entire process, so we can have it all. There are no contradictions here. But what we gotta do now is to make our science open. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for this contribution as well. And I think Ms. Makram has provided really a lot of evidence. The evidence is out there that we need to embark on this open science road. And indeed, you actually said it yourself. We have another marriage. It's all about marriages tonight. It's wonderful, isn't it?
It's a beautiful marriage.
So if I just may ask you one question. I mean, it seems to be a no-brainer that open science is very important. But how can you popularize also this research, especially to, for example, kids? Because you just talked about the next generations.
Yeah, that's true. Well, this is actually a part of our mission, making the science open, fair, collaborative. That was one big chunk of it. But on the other hand, it's also, you gotta make the science understandable to children, to citizens. So we started, we thought the best way of how to bring the science to citizens is actually by starting through the kid. If a 6-year-old understands cutting-edge science, then their mom, dad, and grandparents will also understand it. So it's an initiative, for example, that we have at Frontiers, where we translate cutting-edge research into kids' language, and kids actually review together with these scientists that wrote this research or did this research. They review it together with them until they finally understand it. So you can have a Nobel Prize winner paired up with an 8-year-old and telling them, I don't understand why this is important. Please explain it again to me in my terms. And so they do.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Charlotte.
Perhaps something very provocative. Of course, we had a look also at the attendance list. And we saw that there are publishers in the audience. So would you be so kind to raise your hands if you are a publisher? Okay. May I ask you a question, sir? What is your first reaction to this presentation of Ms. Makram, really stipulating very clearly that open science is the way forward and that we should open up everything that's still locked up behind the paywalls right now?
I just fully agree with it, and I think that's exactly what we're working on. So the solutions that were presented there, be it the quality of the editors, be it the technology, all of that is being worked on right now. And I think that beyond what was shown right here, for us at Elsevier, we're working on tons of other solutions also, to create really a social network for scientists, be it through Mendeley. We're working on solutions around data also, specifically, so repositories, but also tools that allow to do searches directly on data that is on different repositories all around the world. So I think that what you're seeing happening right now is that this is a movement that's embraced by everybody in the research community, including also the publishers, and that everybody's trying to work out through it
So
right now. It's a transition.
There could be a happy marriage also between you and Frontiers, if I
We could,
understand correctly.
and I'm sure we've got people.
What are we discussing and who are we convincing today? That's wonderful.
And I'm sure we've got people from Elsevier who have talked with maybe you or others. I don't know. I haven't. Well, no.
We actually work on the young minds together. Yes.
Okay, very good.
We're in agreement with the Cell Press.
Great. Thank you for your contribution, and once again, a big thank you to Ms. Makram. Thank you so much. So, audience, we just had the perspective from the European Commission, from a leading open science platform, and now we're going to discuss open science from the perspective of earth and geosciences, and also from the perspective of health. And therefore, it is my great pleasure to first introduce to you Mr. Valerio Accocello, who is the Professor of Geosciences at the University Roma Tre. If you want to know more about volcano structures, about natural hazards across the globe, particularly in Italy, Iceland, Ethiopia, and Kamchatka. Well, I learned a lot when I looked up your records. So Kamchatka, please go there if you'd like to. He's your man. So Valerio, the floor is all yours.
Thanks a lot. Well, good evening, everybody. Thanks a lot for inviting me. And I'd like to contribute here, trying to define how open science may accelerate solutions to the earth and to environmental sustainability. I am myself an earth scientist. In particular, I focus on solid earth, which is included here in the geosphere field, which is one of the fields making up earth science, together with hydrosphere, cryosphere, atmosphere, and as all of these fields have some impact on life, we also have biosphere. But all these fields shouldn't make us think that earth science is just a bunch of different separated disciplines. Rather, earth science is becoming more and more characterized by the merging of multidisciplinary knowledge to provide a holistic perspective to understand our planet, which should be seen as a single system. Now you may wonder, what does this raft in the ocean has to do with earth science? Well, to me, this is the perfect analog for the situation of our planet wandering through the void of the universe. Indeed, we are all on a raft with 7.5 billion people aboard, and to survive this raft requires a sustainable environment. And I'd like to convince you that to preserve this raft, the knowledge of this environment must be the global investment for this century. And knowledge in earth science doesn't simply mean to understand our environment or the processes related to our environment. It's not just an academic curiosity. Knowledge in earth science means also to be able to face the major environmental challenges for these decades, for this century. And among these challenges, we have the importance to improve the management of the natural resources. We all dramatically depend on natural resources, both renewable and non-renewable ones. Just think about the raw materials, water, air, or energy, which is the basic ingredient for the development of our societies. But knowledge in earth science is also crucial to be able to face another major challenge, which is in finding a better way towards environmental sustainability, which is a responsible interaction with the environment, avoiding any depletion or degradation of the natural resources. And environmental sustainability is one of the three pillars, but is probably the most important, together with the social and economic sustainability, to achieve global sustainability. And to achieve environmental sustainability, we need to take clear actions. And these involve the preservation of the water cycle, which is being threatened by agriculture, urbanization, reservoir construction, groundwater extraction, as well as to preserve the carbon cycle, which is central to climate and is being threatened by gas emissions and land use. A third action is to preserve the Earth's surface, which is being threatened by the deposition of metals and toxins, desertification, and soil erosion. And the fourth action to reach environmental sustainability is to preserve the coastal areas. This is where most of the population is living, and this is also where we have the combined effects of the forcings from both the oceanic and the land masses. So this makes these areas particularly vulnerable and delicate. But the story is not finishing here. We have at least one other major challenge we have to face with knowledge in earth science. And this is our ability to forecast and to manage natural hazards. And these, of course, include earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, hurricanes, floods, drought, landslides. And on the longer term, we also have global warming, as well as the rise of the sea level. And there are plenty of natural hazards out there. Just think about what has been occurring just in the last month in Central America. We had the hurricanes, we had floods, we had the landslides, we had earthquakes. And this is just an example of the natural catastrophes we had in one of these recent years. This is a situation for 2012, but the situation wouldn't have been different if I would have chosen another year. It would just have been a matter of the distribution of these earthquakes, of these floods, of these typhoons. But the basic message would still be there. That is that every year our planet is hit by at least several tens of different types of natural hazards. And even Europe, our continent, is not exempt from this. There are plenty of hazards in Europe, anywhere in Europe, and in most places we may even have multiple hazards. That is, one hazard triggering the other during the same event. So that we should really start to cope with the dramatic idea that a hazard may strike our houses even tomorrow. At this stage you may think I'm a catastrophist, but I'm not. There is also some good news. Well, apart from the fact that the number of the reported natural disasters has increased dramatically in these last decades, as well as the number of the people who have been affected by these disasters, apart from all of this, the good news is that the number of victims related to these disasters has dramatically decreased in the last decades. And this is due to the crucial role of the longer-term prevention and the shorter-term forecast of these hazards, particularly in the most developed countries. And to convince you about this, I'd like to show you this slide where we compare what has been occurring in 2004 in Sumatra with what occurred in 2011 in Tohoku in northeast Japan. Both areas were stricken exactly by the same type of natural hazard. There was a mega earthquake, same magnitude, which was triggering a tsunami, which was then hitting the coast. But the death toll, as you can see, is completely different. In one case, we had more than 10 times the victims as of the other case. We may think that Japan has been lucky, but it hasn't at all. We all know that Japan is at the forefront in the prevention of natural hazards. So this imbalance in the death toll just reflects this longer-term prevention which has been ongoing in Japan. And this is a very important message because it shows us how far we can get with prevention. We can reduce the adverse impacts of these natural hazards by more than 1 order of magnitude. And so this also shows that while the hazards are inevitable, the disasters may be not inevitable. So at this point, it should be clear that all these challenges for earth science, which are fundamental for the survival of our raft in the universe, all these challenges require appropriate knowledge, as well as rapid, as Kurt and Camilla were pointing out, rapid dissemination of this knowledge. And how can we obtain such an appropriate knowledge and dissemination? Well, the current procedure is that we have a scientist, he uses some public money, and then he makes research and he publishes the results of this research on a paper, on a scientific journal. Now the success, the impact of this paper is determined by its dissemination and thus by its accessibility. Now, as most papers and most journals cannot be accessed unless a subscription fee is paid, the success of the paper will depend on the payment of this fee. So that if this fee is not paid, the paper will not be even have an impact on the scientific or even on the social community. In the extreme of the cases, the paper may even become useless. And this brings to a larger problem because all the institutions cannot afford any longer the subscription fees for the scientific journals. So this results in the loss of the potential impact of research, of science, of knowledge. And so in this golden age of communication, our scientific community is fragmented as it cannot properly share knowledge and disseminate this knowledge, also to third parties, like for example, decision makers. And as Camilla was pointing out, as even in the wealthiest and topmost universities, we are experiencing this limitation, just think about how serious the situation may be for the rest of the world. Not to mention the developing countries, which have been already completely cut off from any sharing of knowledge for decades. My colleagues cannot share knowledge. They cannot educate themselves. And most importantly, they cannot educate their communities. So we reach the paradox that those people, those countries needing most education and also experiencing the highest risks and the lowermost environmental sustainability, well, these countries, they have the least access to knowledge. Well, maybe you've already seen this. It's quite similar. Which is the solution to this? Is open science. This is what we are all here for today. And open science means to rely on open access of the papers and the journals. A couple of years ago, I was highlighting the major challenges in earth science for the next decades. And among these challenges, we have the ones which we have just seen in the first part of the talk, which are numbers 3, 4, and 5. But in addition to this, we also have some more technical challenges which are related to the data, and these are numbers 1, 2, and 6. Well, these concern the collection of the data, the managing of the data, the dissemination of the results, and also the communication of these results also to third parties, like, for example, decision makers. If we go open science, we can finally remove a substantial part of the efforts which are required to face these challenges, so that the scientists can finally focus on what they should do, which is science. And this science, this open science in the world, can finally reduce the social inequality thanks to this unrestricted access, so that anybody can access science, not just the scientists, but even the professionals, even the ordinary citizens. And this implies that we may finally involve and invest also in the developing countries. This is where the critical mass of our planet lies. This is where also we have the largest weight within our raft. And this is where also we are experiencing the most severe conditions in terms of environmental sustainability and risks. So to accelerate this process of involvement, we should define hotspots where we can build pilot studies with dedicated projects and volumes of knowledge based on open science. So I'd like to leave you with sharing a couple of take-home messages at this point. The first is the crucial importance of sharing data and knowledge, because this is the global investment to face the major environmental challenges in terms of resources, hazards, and sustainability. And in this frame of sharing data and knowledge, open science can literally provide a crucial step. The second point I'd like to make is that in this process of sharing data and knowledge, we must involve the developing countries, because this is an added value, this is an investment, and we can also accelerate this process with building pilot studies. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this contribution as well. And I think your approach is very ambitious because you actually look beyond what's just going on in Europe and see that there's so much potential in the developing world, which would be the next step. So hopefully that's gonna work out. So Mr. Acquicella won't be part of the panel discussion, so I would like to open up the floor to you first. Do you have a question for Mr. Acquicella? Everything.
You don't like earth science, huh?
Everything seems to have been clear. Well, then perhaps one question from my side. You just talked briefly about some of the hazards that just happened. We had Irma, we had Jose. Hypothetically, if you would have had more opportunities for having the data openly available, do you think you could have better protected those areas that were affected by Irma and Jose than has been the case right now?
Well, for sure. The more data we have, the more knowledge we have, the more we can work on prevention. This is valid in general for any type of hazard. Of course, some hazards may be more difficult to be anticipated or to be forecast, but others may be more easier. But in principle, this works for all the types of hazards. So I think that this is definitely possible.
Very good, thank you. And the track record is basically there, as you clearly showed to us as well. Yeah. So, Mr. Acquicella, thank you very much. And you can
Thanks to you.
Proceed again. Thank you. And then we would like to turn to the domain of health and how we can accelerate solutions for the healthcare sector. So, Michel Goldman is our next speaker. He's actually already standing next to me. Thank you very much for this good preparation. And Michel Goldman is the co-director for the Institute of Interdisciplinary Innovation in Healthcare at the Université Libre de Bruxelles, and also the ex-director of the Innovative Medicines Initiative. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Okay, after these three exciting and inspiring talks, I'm sure that you are all convinced that we critically need open science to build a better and more sustainable world. I'm also sure that you are all convinced that among the most important challenges if not the most important challenges that we have to overcome to achieve this ambitious goal are related to human health. And if you want to get a global idea of the challenges that we have to overcome, I recommend you to look at this recent series published in the Lancet about the global burden of disease. Interestingly, this paper has been made open access through a grant provided by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The point I would like to make here is that if you look at what has happened between 1970 and 2016, we were quite efficient in reducing the mortality in early life, as you can see here. So this is related to a number of actions which have been made. On the other hand, and that's not surprising, if you look at the number of deaths later in life, it has increased over time. We are still dealing with a real problem in terms of infantile mortality, which remained quite high in terms of millions of deaths as compared to what is happening later in life. Now, if we concentrate now for the causes of disease later in life, as you can see here, we are still dealing with ischemic heart disease, strokes as major causes of death, but actually over the years, the incidence is decreasing through a number of measures, not only pharmacological, but also better diet. There is still a lot to be done, especially regarding the fight against obesity. So I would like to concentrate on the disease in red, because those are the diseases for which the incidence is increasing over the recent years: cancer, diabetes, Alzheimer, and multi-resistant tuberculosis. Now, we have to realize that to address those major diseases, we have really to implement dramatic changes in the way health care is provided, in the way medicine is developed. And you all heard about the precision medicine program, which was put forward by the Obama administration, which is very much about tailoring treatment according to the individual needs of patients. And these require dramatic changes indeed. In a nutshell, look at what is still happening in many diseases. They are qualified, for example, as Alzheimer or Parkinson. And this qualification is related to the name of a great scientist who made the discovery of the disease. But we know that actually the patients suffering from the disease are suffering from different types of disorders. But still we are giving them the same drugs. So it's not surprising that in some of them it's working fine, in others no effect, in others, on the contrary, adverse effects. More and more, and actually the cancer field is leading this revolution, we are tailoring the treatment according to biomarkers, according to analyses that are made on blood, urine, saliva, or tissue, for example, tumor tissues. And according to all these parameters, the patients are stratified in such a way that you can now propose to each of these patient subpopulation, if you wish, the right drug which will have the positive effect that you would like to get. Now, in order to develop these new drugs, we have to change the conventional model, especially in the pharmaceutical industry. This model is completely inefficient. As you can see, it takes time to develop new drugs, a number of failures, and a huge cost for the development of each new drug. So what's the solution to this? What will the new model look like? The first point is that we need collaboration, much more collaboration than in the past. And this has been clearly emphasized by Elia Zeruni, who has been a director of the National Institute of Health in the US, and who is currently the global R&D head of Sanofi. So it's collaboration across scientific and medical communities, and it's collaboration throughout the whole healthcare system. Indeed, it's quite clear that even if you put much more money, if you don't induce, if you don't foster collaboration, and I will come back to that, interdisciplinary collaboration, things will not change dramatically as they should. And clearly, to have this collaboration efficient, to promote this collaboration, it's obvious you need open science. You need open science to allow transparency and dissemination, not only of the data, but of the methods, of the tools that were used to generate the data. You need open science to ensure result reproducibility, which is still a major issue. I will come back to that in a minute. And finally, you need open science to ensure that the results can be translated not only into new drugs, but at the end in better health outcomes for our patients. Open science is needed because more and more we will analyze samples. We will then have to combine the data of this analysis with clinical data. We will have to combine, again, all this data and use sophisticated digital tools to analyze them. So sometimes the patients will be rather passive in terms of providing those data, as shown here. But more and more, the patient, him or herself, will become an actor of the generation of data, of reporting the data. And you all know what is currently ongoing for diabetic patients. Some of you might have Apple Watches to monitor a number of cardiac parameters, but this will certainly extend more and more with new tools developed for monitoring a number of key functions of the body. Now, this means that for the physician, for the healthcare professional, it will become more and more complex to combine all these data and to explain them to the patients and to take the right therapeutic decision. And if you want to be convinced of that, just read the New England Journal of Medicine published today, which is a good reading to be convinced of that. Now, efforts are made to develop the right platforms to indeed combine all these data from different sources and to use them in the best way, as for example, this Cielo platform. They are extremely important because one key element to move medicine forward will be to revise quite dramatically the way clinical trials are done. And we will move from the current situation of the so-called randomized clinical trials to other type of trials requiring very sophisticated bioinformatic analysis, big data management. For example, you will have the umbrella trials in which patients suffering from the same disease will receive different therapies according to some specific biomarkers. And even more interestingly, you will see trials with patients with different disease, for example, different cancers, but sharing some biological or genetic characteristics. And those patients, even if they suffer from different disease, will receive the same type of treatment. So this revolution is ongoing and clearly requires open science. Open science, big data management to, at the end, develop healthcare on the basis of the outcomes that the new therapies are allowing. Now, collaboration, big data management, the critical point is to convince those generating the data that they have to share the data. And again, this brings us back to open science. And just to give you one example from the Innovative Medicines Initiative of the power of data sharing, when these 5 companies agree to share the results of their clinical trials in schizophrenia, they went to the conclusion that it's possible to reduce significantly the number of patients you have to enroll and the duration of observation of this patient to demonstrate the efficacy, the efficiency of a new treatment. Now, there are a number of initiatives ongoing to take advantage of this new approach. And one example is this Watson for Oncology program, which pretend that by combining different types of data and doing some computer analysis, you can predict the treatment that the patient should get, and that this prediction, in a way, is similar to the prediction that would be made, or the decision that would be made by the top oncologists in the world. Interestingly enough, recently there is a STAT investigation, you might know STAT, which is critically looking at different initiatives and institutions, and they show that actually, in their view, this tool is not really efficient. What does it mean? It means that it's not enough to open science, to share data. You must be sure of the quality of the data, and that's a critical point. And actually, when data are irreproducible, you see here the estimation of the cost of the investment, which have been made in research, which at the end proved to be irreproducible. That's obviously very bad for those making the investment. It's very bad for the patients that could be treated by an efficient treatment. It's inefficient, obviously, for economy, for the industry in general. And actually, in this paper, it was calculated that because of papers that proved to be false, that were ultimately retracted, you put patients at risk of receiving bad drugs. So to set standards and to promote responsible data sharing is indeed essential. As well as, and that's a message for universities, it's a message for publishers, it's a message for policymakers. It's not enough, again, to open. You have to check for the quality of the research that is published, and you have all to realize that this has a cost. So I would like to finish on this. You have to open, you have to be sure that the data are reproducible, are valid, are robust, but you have also to be sure that science is communicated in such a way that it is understandable. And the recent paper is a concern because it demonstrates that the readability of scientific papers over time is actually decreasing. It's a very interesting paper using sophisticated means to look at the readability of papers. And this becomes more and more important because, as it was already alluded to, it's important to communicate science not only to scientists, but also to society at large, to patients, and to children. Especially in this case, I was in Cambridge yesterday at this meeting on diabetes, where they present this booklet for children, for which a new type of trials is proposed, children with type 1 diabetes. And obviously, open science is an important aspect of this type of communication as well. So I will just end on this slide saying that, in my view, indeed, to move healthcare forward, we need open science with valid, robust data, but also we need education. Thank you very much.
Citizen is very, very important, especially when it comes so close to ourselves when it concerns the topic of health. So in order to keep healthy, we need to make these data openly available, to keep open science as a very good priority also for the future. So thank you for that. Are there any questions from your side for Mr. Goldman? If not, then I would like to thank you. And
My pleasure.
I'll come back to you also later on when we have the panel discussion. And then we come to the next part of the program. And before I announce the speakers, I just wanted to know from your side, are you still awake? Yeah. Okay, are you still awake? Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I have quite a daunting task right now, because bear with me 1 minute. The panel is so impressive. They have such long titles. I do need some time to pronounce them properly. But I would like to ask those people that are going to call out to come to the floor and join me over here. So I would first like to introduce to you Professor Barry Ritter, who is the chair of the European Open Science Advisory Group of the RISE High Level Expert Group, convened by Commissioner Carlos Moedas, and also ambassador for the Climate Cake from the European Institute of Innovation and Technology. Secondly, I would like to call out Tamas Bereshki, who is a social psychologist and patient advocate, currently communication advisor for the European AIDS Treatment Group, and also working for the European Patients Academy. Then, Mr. Urma Skiljak, member of the Open Science Expert Group of the Estonian Research Council and leading Estonian researcher in biodiversity, informatics and open data. Then, Mr. Moritz Rieder, co-chair of the Global Young Academy and associate professor at Oxford University with a specific interest in organic solar cells and renewable energies. And then I would like to call out to the floor again Ms. Macron and Mr. van der Bergen. So let's get this panel started. And I think you all have seen, we're now really turning to how open science can maximize the impact and value of research for our society. So we'll go a little bit more into depth. And we're going to start with Ritter first. So on the other side of the stage, if I may ask Ms. Ritter, could you share your views on why open science is so critical to build sustainable societies? And can you approach this point also from a historical and cultural perspective?
Well, goodness, I think a lot of what we've heard already this afternoon really stresses the importance of it. I think, well, just very simply, the real problems that the world faces today, and we've had some great presentations on the SDG, the goals, and many other aspects. They're global problems, and they're urgent global problems. So we have to work together, and we have to work together really fast. And I think open science is the way to do it. I think Europe is in a unique position, and I think it has been, in fact, for quite a long time. There's some really interesting work that's been done by a researcher called Joel Mokyr, looking historically at the origins of the Industrial Revolution in the 17th and 18th centuries, and suggesting that although there was new technology in many countries across the world, the only part of the world where there was openness in the Enlightenment was actually in Europe. And so his theory is that it's the combination of the openness and the new technology and the new knowledge that actually led to the Industrial Revolution. Now that had huge benefits, but it's had huge deficits as well. And obviously a lot of the climate change that we're addressing right now is the results of it. So I guess we in Europe have a responsibility to clean it up, as well as actually having the ability to do that, because Europe still is very open. There's no other part of the world where in the EU there are 28 countries, and I must say I sincerely hope it stays 28. Coming from the UK, I certainly don't support Brexit. But there's nowhere else in the world where 28 countries work together in the way that they do in Europe, across boundaries. And I think this is an amazingly open community where we can do it. And just to finish on Brexit, whatever happens, certainly I and my academic colleagues really value the collaboration with colleagues right across Europe.
Exactly, and hopefully there will be some kind of solution found. I'm very confident there will be a solution for sure. And as you actually pointed out, we kind of owe it to our grandmothers, to our grandfathers, to keep up this open science, because it seems to be kind of in our natural DNA. However, there are still a couple of barriers that need to be tackled. And what are the main barriers that we need to tackle from your point of view?
The RISE group it actually was a great experience. We sat down with a completely open book and then brainstormed about what we thought the barriers were for open science. And we came up with 4, and you've heard about many of them already. There was open access and the problem that so much data or so much knowledge is behind paywalls. There was open data, which we've just heard about and how important that is. And the fact that there is actually a lack of experience and a lack of training in how to use it and how to present it. There's research integrity, that we have to have reliable and reproducible data if it's going to be useful for open science. And then the 4th, which I think is almost the most important in many ways because it's the driver, is that the way we live at the moment, competition is good in research, but too much competition, extreme competition, is perverse in that it actually pushes you towards secrecy and not openness. And so we spent quite a lot of time looking at the impact of that, particularly via the funding mechanisms where success rates in grants are very low, in getting papers published, as we've heard earlier on, and actually in the whole assessment of researchers' careers.
For sure, yeah, and I think these are very important points to tackle. Camilla, you wanted to...
I think one of the biggest barriers to open science or to get open access is actually the way how we evaluate the scientists for funding or for positions. Because on the one hand, we are mandating the open science, and researchers actually really want to do it. They want to fulfill those mandates as well to get the grants. But on the other hand, like when they are supposed to get a grant or they're supposed to be promoted for a tenure position, it's actually how they're being evaluated is based on where they have published. And that depends on the impact factor of the journal, and you're supposed to publish in the highest impact factor journals. And today, those are, because they've been around for 100 years, subscription journals. Yeah. So on the one hand, researchers are hearing publish and make it your research openly available, but on the other hand, to get the money or to get that job, they need to be publishing in certain journals. So I think that is a big dilemma today, but there's as well a very simple solution to this dilemma. We got to start moving towards evaluating researchers really based on the impact of their work. So how many views, how many downloads are their articles getting? How many views or downloads is their research data getting? How many citations are their articles getting? You can have today, like with that type of data that I presented as well, compare researchers within a cohort, within like a certain age group, within a certain field, and you can see like the percentiles, you can sort them. And like how impactful is this researcher? And that's based on real quantitative hardcore data, rather than in a political decision, like where did they publish or not. And if we move towards that, we will have open science overnight.
Okay, thank you for that. Would you echo that, Mary? And what are your suggestions for that formulation of academic research career evaluation?
Yes, I mean, I agree with that. We have to get away from very simple metrics and, this person's got 5 papers in Nature and 2 in Science, they must be really good. But I think it isn't just metrics, and one of the conclusions that we came to from our group was that you have to get away from not only the citations that just been mentioned, and also the sheer number of papers, because also it's said, 400 papers, what a prolific or what a very productive scientist. And it's sort of salami slicing of the research. And then actually a better way would be to say, for a particular job application or for a research grant proposal, is name your top 5 publications that you think make the most significant contribution in this context, and then write a narrative around that, describing what it contributes. And that way, it gets away a lot from the metrics, and actually the responsibility is on the people on the panels assessing as well. Not to be lazy, and actually to think and to read all those papers and really assess the quality of the person and the science that they make.
Yeah, that would be a very all-comprehensive self-evaluation that could be very important there indeed. If I may turn to Mr. Killier, I don't know if you have a microphone. Great. Very good. So you're a leading researcher biodiversity informatics. You're a leading researcher also when it comes to ideas with regard to open data in Estonia. And you're the founding father of the Pluto F initiative. So can you tell us a little bit more about this initiative and how this feeds into the discussion?
Yes. Okay, we will go to the roots now. But I like these 5 data metrics very much. Yes, when I was starting to work with maybe not big data, but data became quite big in the middle of 90s for biology when molecular methods became available. So we started to have many issues with data. And if I may explain how we work today, you can imagine we have some kind of timeline for the research project. We start, sometimes before funding, we collect data, we create data, and in the end of project or sub-project, we would like to publish our study based on those data. So we submit our data, and publisher will ask data sets today. Most important journals, they all ask today that we release our data sets in public archives. And we do this. But this is happening in most cases in the end. So you can imagine researcher jumping to another project, collecting new data sets, writing already new papers, and people are leaving this project. So those people are in hurry to find data from different computers, from different data sets, and then they make them open. And you can imagine they are not complete, they are not linked, they are not following common international standards, so they are not atomized, and you can reuse them, but you have to invest a lot of money and time if you want to reuse them. So what we did, we took the same timeline, and we developed tools, archives for biodiversity data management, so that we took archive from the end to the beginning. And we tried to change culture so that people started to upload their data to the archive from the beginning, so that data will be linked and not fragmented, reusable from the very beginning. So in the end, you just, project leader, push button, and data will go to the different data repositories. And you can go on with data management. But yes, but it was difficult.
Yes,
because the culture is different still.
Yeah, I can imagine. I think we all live by this whole FAIR principle, as you said. It was hard to find complete data sets, although it's very important that they're all very interoperable, accessible, reusable, and fairly used. We just said, okay, we made it easy. We created a platform, we created an archive where people can upload their details. Are they willing to do so, or are they still a bit afraid?
It's not easy, it's opposite. You know, those data, they are so complicated, sophisticated, which are collected today, that it's very difficult. And this is one, I think, wall, that they are sophisticated. It's very difficult to manage. So what we found out that there are a few old people. I just told that there was 87 years. He's still working with data sets, mobilizing very old data, actually written in Russian, openly accessible, but written in Russian, maybe not that. So, and making data sets and releasing for the global repositories. But I think what we did, few years ago, we decided to turn to young people mostly and train them, because we realized that it is very difficult to change culture in people like myself, so quite old already. So it's better to turn to the young people, which means, of course, it takes time.
Well, then welcome to Brussels, because lifelong learning is one of the hugest credos here. So we do invite you to still change and make it work, for sure. If I may just, because you already approached the topic of young people and training them and educating them in the right way, I think Moritz from the Global Young Academy, he can tell us more about that, I'm sure. So what are the barriers for young researchers to really fully embrace open science?
Well, I think open science changes the whole system in which we do and evaluate science. So for early stage researchers to fully embrace open science, at the moment the risk is considered too big. Going into open science takes time and effort. So why would you do that, investing this time and effort, and we come back to the competition, if your competition takes that time, that effort, and on top of that, the results you produce to be evaluated against the criterion that are usually based for promotion. So that is at the moment the biggest risk for early stage researchers to embrace it. There are a couple of ideas already being addressed of how to address that. One is creating awareness about, for the early stage researchers, what tools are available, so they don't have to reinvent the wheel, meaning they don't have to spend time and make open science a project in itself, but rather can focus on what they actually want to do, address the sustainable development goals, for example. Then the evaluation system needs to be addressed, and that requires also education not only of the young, but also of the senior people. And eventually, as you said, the early stage and young researchers are driving the open science change, revolution, or whatever you would like to call it. So one has to ensure that they're not only on the bus, but actually driving or co-driving the bus.
Exactly. So it's still very difficult, but have you thought in that sense also about a kind of a reward system? I mean, it's very time consuming, it's very hard. Can't you reward those people that take out just a little bit more time to work for this goal of creating this open science?
I think this is a very, very good question that comes back to the core, which we're often discussing among the Global Young Academy and others, is what creates a creative environment that unleashes the best ideas, and are there actually metrics? Or I think since we're spending taxpayers' money, there should be some metrics, but how can we decide and design those metrics in a way that they are actually unleashing curiosity, encouraging risk, and going back to the journal impact factor, not skew or are not as prone to skewing and self-optimization than the current risks we have. Science has many clever people in there, so they might find a way around any kind of evaluation system, but still, I think that is still at the core of the question of what are the metrics that are really rewarding not only a creative researcher, but also a creative research environment, because it's not only the researchers that are evaluated, but it's also the environment.
Okay, very good. Does anyone have a question about this specific part? Anyone from the panel that would like to react to Mr. Reader on this point?
Can I add?
Yeah.
I think 5 top data sets should be included as well.
Very good. Then we should definitely include that in the future. If I may, please come to Mr. Bereski sitting next to me. So we've already had a contribution from the health side from Michel Goldman. We also work in the health sector, but then mainly from the patient view, I would say. So what are the benefits of open science in patients?
There's, I'm actually in the health sector, but I'm a patient. Yeah. So that's, yes. And you know, this is, as I was listening to you, this was really so interesting because there are a number of points I would like to highlight here, both practical and also ethical, philosophical, if you like. You know that all over the European Union and in Europe in general, there's this huge push towards patient inclusion. This is now one of the favorite slogans in healthcare, also in public healthcare and in research. We must include patients, patients must be involved, you have to talk to your patients, patients must be active participants. The European Medicines Agency requires for every committee, for every commission to include patient representatives in there. However, patients have no access to science because it's so prohibitively expensive that it's impossible for patient organizations or for NGOs to access science And if you consider that I come from Hungary, which is not exactly the most, the richest country in the European Union, Hungarian universities simply can't afford subscriptions. So absolutely no access, even though I'm also a researcher, so I also happen to be a scientist, I have no access. But there are practical ways around this, and so here I am, a venerable scientist, someone who's really well known in the HIV field. I live with HIV. I'm a former substance user, whatever, and I'm like this patient champion, and I'm forced to steal every single day. So if I want to do my work, then I have to find ways around the system, which are usually illegal or borderline illegal, to get access to knowledge. To get access to knowledge which I am expected to disseminate to my communities, right? Because I'm a patient expert, I'm a peer helper. So one of my key jobs is that I disseminate knowledge to other people living with HIV and to other patient organizations. That's what I do in the European Patient Academy, which was one of the initiatives by the Innovative Medicines Agency, initiative. So, but I have no access to this knowledge, so what do? We establish journal clubs. Do you do this at home as well? We establish journal clubs. Journal clubs are when people get together and we discuss papers, and we never ask the question, where is that paper from? That just doesn't come up, right? So we just pretend.
This is the book club 2.0.
It is, yes, it is. It totally is. Then also, you know what I do? I use my daughter's university account. My daughter happens to be an aspiring medicines researcher, so I use her account. Is this legal? Not at all. So I not only risk my own career, I also risk my daughter's career, but I must have access to these papers. So I have no other choice. We also write blogs about papers, and then suddenly in the middle of the blog entry, you will find a PDF of the paper. Is this legal? No. But do you have any other choice? Also no. So it's so unfair, that on the one hand, there's this expectation from society and also from the science community that we have to include patients. On the other hand, this is exactly the audience that has zero access to science, and then I will not even go into the details with poor countries, poor universities, poor NGOs. NGOs are just by definition not rich. So it's, I'm sorry.
No, it's fine, definitely. And but I just wanted to point out, this is the other side of creativity. You have to be creative to get the information, whereas with the information that you already have, you should be creative in using the data for very sustainable outcomes.
But isn't this too much? Isn't this too big of an ask? Haven't we done enough already? We also have to be creative with data and information. So why? Why is that? Why don't we just have access? So why not open access? It just makes so much sense. We also know, and this was also mentioned here already, that patients who are informed, people who know about their illness and who know about their treatment, have better health outcomes. It just makes sense.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for this very elaborate contribution. It's good to know from your personal experience as well what the real obstacles are. And then you're wondering, can't we just penalize those people actually? European Commission courts, do you have competences to tell people and organizations, this is not the way to do science, we're not going to support this anymore?
Yes, Europe the big policeman or woman. I don't think it works that way. I think, as I said before, it needs to be a bottom-up process. And what is happening here tonight is, for example, very important, that there is debates about this, that researchers are aware of the better, more credible, quicker science outcomes that are relevant thanks to open science. It's very important that these stories are told. I think what I feel is, especially with the younger generation, but not only, that there is a big frustration with this publish or perish paradigm in science. And researchers want to have impacts. They want a good career. They want to be celebrated as a good scientist. But they also want impact. They want to be relevant in society. And I think very often now, researchers are probably in an environment where they're told by their seniors, watch out, open science, not very credible, science, nature is probably better. And the young scientists, who should be very open to this kind of open science, are hesitating a lot. So I think what we need to do, what we want to do, and what we will be doing even more, is to provide incentives to the institutions, to the researchers, to the teams, to go in this direction resolutely. That's why open access to publications is an obligation in the framework program. Open access to data is not the default policy. We require all the consortia working in projects to have data management plans. We make the cost of these data management plans eligible, so that there is no problem of costs there. That means that there is money available for this. That also is an incentive for people to work on it. We see that there is an incredible need of skills development, training in this whole area of how to make data fair, how to use them. If we don't do that, if we don't have attention for that, it will take a longer time than we can afford, and we need to speed up in this. I fully agree that the reward systems in universities have to evolve. Very important, the evaluation system, the alternative metrics, more qualitative evaluation also of research and researchers. All that needs to happen. But what is very important, as I said, is also like we're doing here tonight, is talk about this. Bring out the good stories. That's incredibly important, because that's when scientists will know that this is the way to go.
Exactly. You're in the perfect position to create the right framework conditions, and indeed we're here to discuss them and to ensure that after Horizon 2020, FP9 will embark on this road for sure. Mr. Killian, you wanted to make a contribution? You were eagerly taking the microphone.
I was
offered. Mary, please, the floor is yours.
Just a very quick contribution, which is we discussed training and skills right across all the areas that we were talking about. And one of the conclusions we came to was that we're really good in universities at putting on skills programs for the young researchers, the early researchers, when they're doing their PhDs. And maybe in the first 3 years after that. But actually the target audience is beyond that. You want to get at the mid-career researchers and the more senior ones as well, because they're the ones who set the culture, and they're the ones that are sitting on the research panels making the decisions as well. And how you actually put on a training program for a more senior researcher is quite a subtle, problem. You don't call it training, you have to call it something else. But you really have to do that, because it's not fair otherwise the youngest people, who, as you say, are most open to being open in science, they can't take all the responsibility.
Exactly. So you should create some conditions also where research from all levels come together, discuss and tackle the different issues together. Yeah. Maurice.
I can only reiterate that point, is that's felt by many early stage researchers we've spoken to, is that they want this to embrace this. They often bring these skills with it. Openness, no pun intended, curiosity, persistence, to a certain level also the stubbornness to push it through. But again, they're in an environment, they have their mentors, they have their advisors, they have people deciding all their funding in the panels, where training and generating awareness of the benefits of open science and what it means to go down that route really can have for advantages. And the transition to open publishing, open access publishing, is, in my opinion, only part of it. I think we need a much larger institutional change, because otherwise it is moved to the early stage researchers with more training and even more training. I think you need IT literacy to a certain extent, like IT is permeating everyday life, to make open science not a research project in itself, but use it to actually leverage your research and to generate an impact.
So there should really be also solid management plan and rationale for an institution to embark on this the roads. You just mentioned IT and technology, we come to that later. We first have a question from the audience. Can you please state your name and organization?
Yes, Alea López de San Román from the League of European Research Universities. So thank you very much for all the comments. And of course, I agree with the reward system of universities. We are already working on that. Incentives, skills, bottom-up approach. But there is a word that I've heard, but I think we should say much more often, that is funders. So if we want to achieve open science, we really need to convince the funders. This is also the approach followed by the European Commission with Horizon 2020 and open access. So let's make those funders make open access and open science compulsory or by default. So it should be also mentioned into the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We very much focus now on universities, research technology organizations, we have the European Commission. Do you talk to the funders as well, Mary?
Yes, we do. And that's a really good comment from the audience because I think the most extreme version of funders' driving behaviour is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where papers published that have been that are from research funded by them have to be immediately open, and that actually cuts out quite a lot of the so-called top journals. But this is a very big funding organisation and it will have a real impact. And I think if other funders were as adamant and mandatory as that would really help. And I think for Europe, I mean, the ERC is a fantastic agency and so prestigious now that they could really drive a lot of behaviour across Europe. And we've also thought about funders in another context, actually going back to the very beginning of the competitiveness for grants. That whether it's by redistribution or more money, obviously more money would be lovely for research, but funding, a lot of it goes into big group funding rather than into principal investigators. And coming back to the young researchers, it's tough to get your foot on the bottom rung of the ladder if you don't belong to one of these big consortia. So more smaller funding and perhaps being very radical in terms of how the funding is allocated as well.
Thank you. I think Mr. Bereski wanted to point something out to Camilla as well. More throughout, we have everyone engaged. And then we come to a question as well from the audience. So
I just wanted to... Sorry, go ahead, Camilla.
Okay. So I totally agree with what Marianne says. If the funders were mandated, like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, overnight there would be open access. And there's no issue to quality or anything. Believe me, nature and science would flip.
Okay, clear.
So what I wanted to say that is, it's not just doom and gloom. There's also a handful of really good examples for how this works already in practice in some disease areas, including some cancers, breast cancer, some blood cancers, HIV, hepatitis, where all these stakeholders can work together in order to produce science, which is community-based and community-initiated science. You've been talking about citizen science. Well, this is it. So when researchers and pharmaceutical industry admit that they have no access to the right populations, but the patient community does have access to that particular population, then let's work together. And they have seen that this works. And so we provide that knowledge that we have from the community side. And just because we are patients living with a disease, whatever disease that is, that does not reduce my capabilities as a researcher. I was trained in methodology. I know how to do it. So my HIV or my breast cancer or whatever will not impact on my scientific capabilities. So let's do it together. And there are examples already for these kind of initiatives. So it's not totally unheard of. It's not like something that needs to be reinvented or invented, but it's there. Let's just expand or build on these models and make use of it. Exactly.
I'd like to pick up upon Mary just this early independence to try out something new. A few years back, the European Academy did a global survey on the state of young scientists, and they wanted to figure out what are their fears, what are the worries, and what are the opportunities early stage researchers see. And there were three notable, well, there were many, but one of them was mentioned Another one was skills training for how to have impact, which is nowhere taught or not really taught. You just expect that either it comes with your gray hair or overnight. And the last one was earlier independence. And for that, early stage researchers, again coming back to the generating impact and the open science approach, for them they see it as opportunity to really have an impact. But as long as they're not independent, they can't really walk that way and walk new ways. And much of that area of open science, of this concept, of this idea, is still developing and worked out. So I think we need many more people actually walking those ways and testing and sharing what is working and what is not working. I think there are many early stage researchers around that would like to do that, and with the right level of support from the institutions, from the funders, I think we could see quite some activity there.
Yeah, so the will is there, but it still needs a cultural change also within the institutions, for sure. A question from the audience.
Yes, thank you to the inspiring panel, really. I think I have a question for Mr. Van den Bergen.
What's your name, organization?
I'm going to say. My name is Katrien Lescroat from Flanders Marine Institute in Ostende, in Belgium. Quickly, our open access, open data is in the core of our institution, and we work together with IOC UNESCO for the training aspects of that. But the challenge is daunting. A few weeks ago in Science Business, it was mentioned that with the initiative of the open cloud comes the huge challenge of being able to digest all the data. So it was mentioned that the need of data scientists is tremendous. So you already mentioned a little bit, you said that we have to go quick. I imagine there are already some ideas. Artificial intelligence to address the big data is one of them. I would really be interested to hear your views, because I imagine that it needs a global strategy, or at least a common strategy to address this. Thank you.
Well, I can only agree. You're absolutely right. And that's part of our policy for creating this European Open Science Cloud, which is not only about federating repositories and making data fair, which of course is the beginning of everything. If we don't have that, there won't be a cloud. But there's a whole ecosystem around it that we have to take care of, which is the open science culture and evaluation and rewarding in institutions, but also creating the whole ecosystem for data analytics, so that this data can actually be used, that the quality can be checked. And that's something that we would hope can also be created by going in this direction of creating this European Open Science Cloud, which will need the mobilization, and that's the difficulty, the challenge for us. It's an exciting project, but it's very challenging, because it basically requires the mobilization of everyone that is involved. And that's the difficulty we have. It's the funders, it's the researchers, it's the data repositories, it's the big infrastructures, it's the governments, it's everyone. And getting all them aligned, working together, that's quite a challenge. But our commissioner is very clear that this needs to happen. So we'll be working on this. But you're absolutely right, the data analytics, the artificial intelligence will also be a condition for this to work.
Yeah, indeed, a very good point. And yeah, data scientists, I mean, what we've seen in Camilla, and you said so as well, I mean, the whole open science revolution has been there for about 10 years. It's only logical that these new kind of jobs, they still need to be further developed. And we need to base it on knowledge that we don't even have right now, and that's going to be a huge challenge. We've briefly talked also about the role of IT, which Peter also mentioned, and then I'd like to come to Camilla again. Can you tell us more about the role of technology in driving the open science revolution?
Yeah, I think that technology is incredibly important. Without technology, nothing happens today. Well, there's of course the researcher's perspective, and you need to be literate in IT systems, whether it's open science or any type of science. Without software and computers, nothing works today. But I think, like from our perspective, the publishing perspective or the provider's perspective, technology is as well incredibly important. As I mentioned, the volumes of the articles or of the data is growing exponentially. In open science or in open access, we're committing ourselves to publish everything that is valid science and let the technology then evaluate its impact, or at least provide us with the numbers, whatever we do with it. But at least you get the quantitative assessment of it. So without technology, you can't actually publish this at an efficient way. The way that without technological support, you can't fly millions of planes daily from A to B. You would have havoc, basically. You can't just have pilots, like sitting in the planes and hoping for the best to get us to New York from here. So we also cannot just sit around and have, like the editors, as bright and as brilliant as they are, and we had today presentations from some of our chief editors, but they also cannot read every single paper and say, like this is good, this is bad, here they've done the statistics right. These authors maybe have, like with these reviewers, a conflict of interest. Here we have an ethical concern, etc. and so forth. We need technology in order to do that. So that's the type of software that we have been driving and developing over the past 10 years. It basically gives you readouts, based on keywords, for example. If you have a paper on vaccines, that may, be controversial. So it flags these things. It flags them to the editors, it flags them to the reviewers. They can double check on these types of issues. If a reviewer is from the same university as the authors, it might be a conflict of interest. It may not be a conflict of interest, but somebody needs to evaluate that. So all of these checks are basically in place. And without them, without all of this technology, we won't be able to move towards 3 million papers. I'm not just talking for Frontiers, but I'm talking now for the entire publishing industry. Towards 3 million papers or terabytes of data. It has to be curated, and the tools, the digital tools, need to be put in place.
Thank you. Just to stick to this technology, Mr. Killian, we really focus very much on the open data and also part of the Estonian Open Science Expert Group. Can you tell us more about the role of technology specifically for this field of open data? Because Estonia is one of those countries, as far as we know, and that's what we hear all over the place, you're the country of the European Union.
Thank you. I was not prepared for that question, so and I'm not sure that we are ahead of. I have heard actually here so much interesting, and actually one thing maybe. Will partly answer your question also, but I'm really positive about the young generation of people. I'm not calling them, at least in biology, data scientists. I'm calling them biologists in silico. And they don't go that much to the forest, to the meadows. Yes, that's maybe not that nice side, but I have seen 10, 15 years now how they have been growing and actually making their own career without any funding sometimes. And I can see that there is new culture coming up all the time, that we can have a commission in Estonia and we can make papers and rules, etc. But there is already a young generation coming up. And it's so funny, if I can have one example. So I will still go to the nature and look for the birds, and I can identify even Homo sapiens here in this room, so by my eye. And they are sitting and looking to the screens, and there are stretches of DNA, and they are talking to each other, and I'm listening and saying, this is this species, this is this. Why you think this? You see these nucleotides here. Oh yes, I remember. Yes, this is this species. So, can you see? And then they are cleaning up those data sets. They are taking them from gene banks, including the European Nucleotide Archive. They are cleaning up and making them open again, updated, linked, everything. So, and it's happening. And they are talking to each other, and they are doing this. So, I'm not worried at all about open data, actually.
Very good, because there's always this individual curiosity to find out
Yes.
how we can leverage this open science. Thank you. Well, I think we have talked a lot about open science bringing us so many positive things, but it might also have some negative side effects. And Moritz, I believe you have a kind of opinion also on middle, high-income countries and how open science could be perceived there.
Yeah, well, in the Global Young Academy, we've got members from more than 50 countries around the world, and sharing, discussing, and working together at global solutions is a big topic. But when you talk about making all data available, then I sense some reluctance to a certain extent. And that reluctance, if I understand it correctly, goes back to a little bit of what happened to the natural resources in many of those low and middle income countries, that once they are out there, once they are known, someone else parachutes in and benefits from that, from this data. And I think there needs to be a lot of education, not in terms of the on top of, well, there needs to be, in my opinion, a lot of education what it actually means to make one's data set open, what rights you can retain. There are lots of different licenses and models with various levels of restriction, and from very serious to very funny. There's one license called the beer license. If you meet the writer of the software, you have to buy him a beer or her a beer. But this is nothing an early stage researcher can really get an overview from. So you need, again, going back to the institutions, you need or somewhere a point of contact where you can get quickly the information you need, quickly the training you need to put it in place, that you really feel still empowered over your data and you have benefit. It's not taking away like natural resources where you don't have any local benefit anymore, but you really gain as well, and you see that you also can gain something by data. And that we come back to the fair principle. That word is not probably chosen for a purpose as well. That this works out not at the detriment of those who generate the data, but might not have the technical capabilities to spot hidden trends or other gems in one's data.
So many steps still to be taken. Does anyone like to?
These are very important points that you raise, and I'd like to draw attention to three aspects in this. One is that we need to find a good solution for making sure that the people who curate the data, put them in, can be identified. And there are techniques for this, unique identifiers, etc. And that needs to become really a standard practice. Just like you have in the publications, you have citations, the same should happen for data. I think there's still a lot of work to be done there, but we know in what direction to go. Second aspect is the whole regulatory framework of this. Makes it very complex. In May 2018, the General Data Protection Regulation will kick in, which will have enormous implications for how data are used, shared, taken up. We have the Copyright Directive, which is also creating all kinds of challenges. It's very challenging because it's very complex, especially with the GPRD, when not the GDPR, General Data Protection, GDPR, thank you. There's still many open questions, so we'll have to work on this. But at the same time, it's also reassuring that there will be, at least at the European level, a coherent framework for this. And that's coming back to the Science Cloud. Another element, another dimension of the Science Cloud is that we need to be able to offer to scientists who make their data fair and use fair data, that they know that they are complying in an easy way with this whole regulatory framework. And the third aspect is the global dimension of this. Because we need to have at global level agreements, understandings, certainly with our major partners in the world, that this is to mutual benefit. And that's something we're doing through a G7 working group at the level of the G7 science ministers, with the help of the OECD also, where we're trying to come to global standards for open science, so that there is not this exploitation unilaterally. Because indeed, to put it very cruelly, we don't want to have an open science cloud that is open to everyone, but then the use of this is going to other parts of the world only. There needs to be mutual benefit in this. So these are very important aspects.
Thank you very much. And that would be the next step, of course. I mean, I think that Mr. Arcangelo also pointed out there's a lot of potential there also for developing countries. So it's a global discussion, in fact. It's not just a European discussion, because everything is very much interconnected right now. So I hope that will be the next step as well to create global standards. I think you
Just
wanted to add.
A single sentence to this, which will probably only add to the complexity of the whole thing, but I just want to feedback that in larger patient communities, there's a lot of talk about data ownership when we speak about whose data is this, and there are many patients who are very sensitive about this, and they say, well, I give my blood and my tissue I give pieces of my body to science, so whose data is this finally? And I don't expect this question to be answered now, but there's a lot of talk about this in patient communities, and I think it's a very legitimate ethical perspective that we should not disregard.
Okay, thank you very much. If I just may come back to your second point, which is that regulatory framework, because of course the framework conditions need to be set in such a way that we can progress. May I ask Camilla, what is your view on the latest developments, for example, the EU copyright reform, one of those regulations that are being set?
Well, our position is very simple. When it comes to scientific papers, it just needs to be text and data mineable, and there should be no exemptions. It should be free to text and data mine, whether it's researchers or companies. Companies, as we are seeing, critically depend on science, technology and innovation, on this research, the scientific papers. Today, Europe's planning to build the open science cloud, but very little data is actually available. So what do? We actually go and we mine papers. And we look at the results sections, and we mine out of hundreds and thousands of papers on a certain disease or so, all the different results, and put them together back into a database. For example, in the Blue Brain project, which my husband is running, Henry, and the Human Brain project, this is exactly what they have been doing, mining lots of papers because there's no data available. So thousands and hundreds and thousands of neuroscience papers to put it back into a brain model and then start simulating the thing. Now this is for the research, but if we want to have successful companies, economically strong companies, allow them to do the same thing. So our position is very clear, just make it all. It's funded by our research. It's my taxpayers' money that went into this research. I want to be able to benefit from it in any type of way without any exceptions.
Exactly. Yeah, Lawrence.
That might sound now a little bit strange, but again, from the discussions we had among many European young academies and the Global Young Academy about open data, we started actually the statement with not all data needs to be open, because research is such a diverse field. We always put it together as researchers, as scientists, but the diversity in these fields and also the requirement on the data are so different. We've spoken about patient data. To what extent should the personal identifiable patient data be online? And this is a very, very careful area that really has to be decided from case to case. We come back to artificial intelligence and we see how little data is actually necessary to identify individuals. So I think this is something that has to be very, very carefully considered. And that's why also it might sound controversial, but that's why we started the statement with not all data needs to be open, because there have to be exceptions and that has to be evaluated from case to case.
Of course. But in order to do that, you do need to have critical people that can decide on what should be open and what could perhaps not be open. Ladies and gentlemen, we've almost come to the end of this panel, unfortunately. I think we could have talked for hours still, but I'm sure you're also looking forward to the reception where you also have the opportunity to talk to the panelists. Just one final thing, and this is something that you have not prepared at all, but what I like doing for sure. Can you just give us one keyword to make open science a true success? Mary.
One key word. I think it's reward. I think you have, yes, okay. You have to reward people for it, and then you'll get the rewards for it
Thank
afterwards.
you very much.
Sorry, I have two words. I would say institutional change.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm going to steal Court's. Share, care, dare. The daring part in it is, I think, very important.
Thank you.
I would say make it exciting and celebrate successes.
That's a whole lot of words.
I'm from the Commission.
Good point. We're allowed to do so, right? Yeah.
So almost everything has been said. So maybe freedom, I think. Freedom in inside and outside, in institutions. Yeah.
I will say what I tell every student of mine in the Patient Academy, and what we say to doctors: if you could learn it, I can learn it. It's just knowledge.
Very good. Thank you very much, and please give the panel a big hand. So if you'd like to, you can just stay here on stage, because later on we'll take a group picture. So otherwise we'll just keep on mobilizing you up and down on the stage. And we have come almost to the end of this symposium. And well, you have heard already several references to the Estonian Presidency of the Council to the European Union. And it is my great pleasure to give the floor to Mr. Martin Esalu from the Ministry of Education and Research in Estonia to give the concluding remarks. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Dear guests, I thank all the speakers and the panelists for the fruitful discussion, and of course the mission of Switzerland to the EU, SwissCore and Frontiers for the excellent job in organizing the event. On behalf of the Estonian Presidency, I have the honor and pleasure to wrap up this very fine evening with some concluding remarks. What we have heard today, I would say, is open science being more than merely an object of an abstract policy discussion. The talks and the panel discussion did a splendid job in putting open science into context, into use, showing it to us in the service of our greater good. I guess everyone agrees that knowledge has to be shared, and that is hard to argue when free flow of data can be treated as the fifth freedom of the EU. Open science needs to be an integral part of innovation. Data is money, the new money. It's an asset so far underused and can be converted into profitable services. And we're not only talking about startups with flashy ideas, we are also talking about real human lives. Real human lives depending on the pace of innovation. Also, our sustainability is at stake as well. Embracing open science has its barriers. They can be cultural, economic, or technical. The latter can be infrastructure, infrastructure needs or common standards. for enabling FAIR principle to realize. And also funding open science certainly is a challenge that has a different nature depending on the level we are talking about. I believe it's a firm understanding that the shift to open science needs to come at a good cost-to-benefit ratio. And also regarding the cultural shift, the framework program certainly has a big role. A big role in leveling the playing field, whether it was FP7 bringing in open access to publications, Horizon 2020 introducing open data, or the future framework program and its developments. The framework program is the main instrument at EU level to fund cross-border and transdisciplinary research and development, and therefore the framework program is an excellent platform for implementing and spreading new approaches. That's a bit too early, I guess. Okay, I'm not touching that. The Estonian Presidency, the digital presidency as we call it, holds open science in high regard. The two key words of our presidency in the area of research, development and innovation are funding and impact, and open science can relate to both. In the big picture, funding is connected to how the society perceives research and its well-being. And impact, on the other hand, can only gain from the results of research being more open for reuse, whether we talk about publications or data. And surely there are different approaches to any important policy topic, and open science is no different. Our way of conceptualizing open science is not so much as a goal or thing in its own, but rather as an instrument for creating transparency and enhancing the impact of excellent research. And in 2 weeks' time in Tallinn, the main presidency conference, European Research Excellence, Impact and Value for Society, will take place, and the call for action, the Tallinn call for action, focusing on the role of research and innovation in the future of Europe, will be presented. And part of the call will be stressing the role of open science in ensuring the transparency in the process of science. And it is up to the funders, the institutions, and the researchers to embrace the open science movement and develop meaningful strategies to promote it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this final contribution, and I think it's clear we can make this connection between the priorities of the Estonian presidency and open science, because in the end, with funding for open science, we can create impact. So ladies and gentlemen, this was it for tonight. I would like to let you know that there will be a conference report made available, as well as a small video of tonight. I hope we managed to enlighten you on the topic of open science, that you have learned a lot, that you got energized, and now we're gonna energize you with some more stuff, which is food and drinks, and I'm sure you're gonna like that so much. So have a pleasant evening, and have a safe trip home, and we hope to see you next time. Thank you.